This is a story about Elijah and a very damp sacrifice. After Solomon had reigned as king over the Israelites, other kings followed him. Many of them strayed from the Lord God. Ahab was one of those kings. He did many bad things, and one was to marry Jezebel, the daughter of a neighbouring king. Because Jezebel worshipped the god Baal and other heathen gods, she made the worship of other gods acceptable to the Israelite people, even though they had promised to only worship the one true God. Ahab was also led astray by his wife and worshipped Baal. Indeed, he put to death all the prophets of God until there was only one prophet left, called Elijah. Elijah stood before Ahab the king and, told him off. "King Ahab, you are not worshipping the one true God," he said, "and you have caused the Israelite people to follow heathen gods. You will be punished, you and the Israelite people. Because you have stopped worshipping God, there will be a famine. There will be no rain, not even any dew, unless I say so, until you are sorry for worshipping the heathen gods and turn back to God." Then Elijah departed from the presence of the king, because God had told him to go and hide. Elijah went into hiding near a brook from which he could drink water, and ravens brought him food every day to sustain him, as God had told him they would. After 3 years of famine, God came to Elijah once more. "It is time," said God. "Go to King Ahab again, and then I will bring rain upon the land once more." So Elijah went to Mount Carmel and met King Ahab. "Is that you, Elijah?" asked King Ahab. "You're the troublemaker, causing famine and bad luck for Israel." "Oh no, King Ahab," replied Elijah. "If Israel is suffering, it is because they have turned from God to the heathen gods to worship them. In fact, they are only doing what you have shown them to do. You have been worshipping Baal also, the god of your wife's people, instead of the one true God of the Israelite people. And you have been encouraging her and the prophets of Baal in their deeds. It is time we need to sort this out. Get the Israelite people to meet me here on Mount Carmel. Bring your wife Jezebel and her prophets of Baal. Let's all see who the real God is." So the Israelite people assembled on the mountain, and Elijah spoke to them. "Listen up, people," he said. "You are the Israelite people, God's special chosen people, and yet you're worshipping Baal, the heathen god of Jezebel. You can't keep doing this. You need to worship God. Or perhaps you need to worship Baal, if he is a god." Since the people had indeed been worshipping Baal, there was nothing the people could say to this, so they stayed silent. Elijah continued, "We will have a contest. Then we will see who the one true God really is. All of the other prophets of God have fled or been killed, and there's only me left. So I will be alone against all the prophets of Baal. There are 450 prophets of Baal, far too many for an even contest. But never mind. I will create an altar and set the wood, and be ready to make sacrifice to God. And you, prophets of Baal, will also build an altar and set the wood, and you will make a sacrifice to your god Baal. But you will not create the fire. The God who answers by sending fire, he is the true God. Do you agree to the contest?" The prophets of Baal looked at each other. "Yep, we agree to the contest," they said. And the people asked Elijah, "Will you follow the God who answers with fire?" "Oh, yes," said the people. "We will follow the God who answers with fire." Then 2 bulls were brought forward. "Very well," said Elijah, "let the contest begin. Since you have so many prophets, you may begin the contest. Take the bull, build the altar, set the wood, then call upon your God to bring down fire to consume the sacrifice." The prophets of Baal chose one of the bulls and began to prepare it for sacrifice. They created an altar, then spread the good dry wood around it and lay the sacrifice upon it. Then they retreated a respectful distance and began to pray to their god Baal to bring down fire and consume the sacrifice. After a while, nothing happened. So the prophets began to dance around the altar, calling, "Baal, answer us!" and "Baal, bring down fire!" And still, nothing happened. The prophets continued their praying and dancing and chanting all morning, but nothing happened. After a few hours, Elijah began to taunt them. "Shout louder," he said. "Surely he is a god. Perhaps he's busy or travelling. Maybe he's asleep. Do you need to waken him? Shout louder." The prophets continued for the rest of the day. They prayed, they danced, they chanted. Then they prayed and shouted and danced and chanted some more. They kept on making more and more frantic efforts, but still nothing happened. "Enough," said Elijah. "Now it's my turn. Come here, people, and gather nearer to me." So the people moved towards Elijah to see what he was doing. Elijah began to build an altar. In fact, he began to rebuild the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. He rebuilt it with 12 stones, each stone representing a tribe of Israel, those tribes being descended from Joseph and his brothers, the sons of Jacob. The people realized what he was doing. Elijah dedicated his altar to the Lord God. Then he dug a trench around it, a good deep trench. Then he put wood onto the altar, good dry wood. Then he lay the sacrifice upon the wood, just as the other prophets of Baal had done with theirs. When the people were ready for him to call up on the name of God, he didn't. Instead, Elijah called for help from the people. "Bring me some water," he asked them. So the people brought him some stone jars of water. "Pour it on the sacrifice, onto the wood, and let it run down into the trench," he commanded. Bemused, the people poured water onto the sacrifice, and it flowed over the wood and into the trench. "Bring more water," commanded Elijah. "Pour it over the sacrifice, the wood, the altar, and let it flow into the trench once more." So again the people did as he commanded them. "Do it again," said Elijah. "Make sure everything is really, really wet through." For a third time the people did as he commanded and poured water all over the sacrifice, the wood, the altar, and into the trench. By now the sacrifice was thoroughly soaked with water. So was the wood and the altar, and the trench was completely filled with water. Everything was totally soaked, absolutely drenched, really, really wet through. Then Elijah stepped forward. He lifted his face and began to pray. "Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I am your servant. I have done all of this at your command. Now show yourself to the people of Israel. Show your power and bring your people back to their belief in you. Answer my prayer and bring fire to consume the sacrifice. Then the people will know you are God." At that moment there was a spark and flames, and the wood began to burn, and the sacrifice was burned up. And then the stones of the altar, even the soil and all the water in the trench, all were consumed by the fire sent by God. The people were stunned and fell with their faces to the ground. "The Lord, he is God," they cried. "The Lord, he is God." And after a while, when Elijah asked, the rain began to fall once more.